Thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming to our roundtable on DNS abuse and artificial intelligence. A very timely topic, a combination of two very timely topics, of course. And without further ado, since we have a panel of luminaries, let me introduce them first. Directly to my right, Jeff Bedser is a seasoned entrepreneur and leader in cybersecurity, investigation, threat intelligence, and DNS abuse mitigation. He is the CEO of CleanDNS, a company that is on the mission to clean up the internet for good, for better or worse, by detecting and stopping malicious DNS activities. In his past life, he was a private detective, and he uses that expertise to protect internet end users, the people that we care about here at large. He's on various boards and committees on internet governance, stability, and jurisdiction, and has 25 years of experience in the field, founded iThreat, a threat intelligence company, and he has been serving on the SSAC at ICANN since 2007, and was formerly on the PIR board. So, Jeff, thank you very much for being with us. Tim Maurer is to his right. Tim is currently the Senior Director of Global Cybersecurity Policy at Microsoft, where he collaborates closely with Microsoft's internal teams and stakeholders and external stakeholders. Before Microsoft, Tim was with the United States government, first as the Senior Counsel for Cybersecurity, Emerging Technologies for Homeland Security, and subsequently on the White House National Security Council. I believe that was under President Biden. And has spent a decade working on cybersecurity and tech policy, and is the author of Cyber Mercenaries, The State, Hackers, and Power. To his right, we have Ana Neves. Many of you probably know Ana as the Portugal GAC representative. Ana wears a number of hats. She's a member of the current IGF MAG, which is a board of heavy hitters that keeps the IGF running. She is the chair of DNS.PT's advisory board and leads the Internet Governance Office at FCT, FCC, and MECI in Portugal. She's also the vice chair of the United Nations Commission on Science, Technology, and Development. She has over 30 years experience in digital science and technology development and public policy, and was recognized in 2018 as Portuguese CIO Public Sector of the Year and European Digital Leader. So we have a panel that makes me feel obscure and underachieving. So without further ado, would like to kick off the discussion. So if we can go here, we are to the first slide. Before we go any further with this, I'd like to mention that this entire presentation was written by Microsoft Copilot. I'm not joking. And for somebody, there it is. So instead of God being my co-pilot, Microsoft is my co-pilot. I hope you appreciate that, Tim.
I'm ready. The human backup is here.
There you go. So according to Copilot, DNS abuse refers to the misuse of the domain name system for malicious purposes, such as phishing, malware distribution, and other cyber threats. The kind of official ICANN definition of DNS abuse has 5 categories, maybe one for each ICANN geographic region. Malware, botnets, use of botnets, phishing and farming, and spam, but only when spam serves as a delivery mechanism for one of the other 4. So spam per se is not considered to be DNS abuse. Those of you who've been around ICANN for a while can remember we had several years of discussion, is a good term for it, about the limits and definition of DNS abuse. And rather than discussing it anymore, we're at least living with this definition of DNS abuse as we go forward, since this certainly gives us enough problems. As you know, and I know, and Microsoft Copilot knows, AI and machine learning are increasingly being used to combat DNS abuse by detecting and mitigating these effects more effectively. I'll let you read all this stuff on your own time. We don't need to hear it. I'd rather hear what our panelists have to say than what Microsoft Copilot has to say. And the design, of course, was chosen for me by Microsoft PowerPoint. And the picture on the front was also chosen by Copilot. I'm actually a very creative person, but now I've decided just to let Copilot do all that stuff. So in any case, I'd like to turn first to Tim. I'm just going to say for one more minute, of course, DNS abuse is also being manifested by artificial intelligence. And there are several examples in this PowerPoint as well of the ways in which AI is creating new forms and mutating older forms of DNS abuse. So we have, kind of a battle of the artificial intelligences for good and for evil. And our three panelists will discuss the both the general cybersecurity and AI interface, how that affects DNS, and anything else that's on their mind. So to kind of give kind of a broad overview, Tim, who's the only non-ICANN insider on our panel, will get to kind of kick us off.
Thank you very much, Craig, and it's a pleasure to be with you all here. I was just talking to Anna. I think the last time that we had a chance to meet was prior to the pandemic, which is, I think, also the last time I had the chance to attend an ICANN meeting. And it's a particular pleasure to be here with all of you today because this is a community that we at Microsoft are very excited about to hopefully help us use AI and maximize its potential for the defense of the internet and make sure that it is used to actually help achieve what we hope the technology will unlock, which is further human progress, and also make sure that we use it in ways that it'll help us advance existing objectives and goals that we share. To Greg's point, I just joined Microsoft a little over a year ago. So it's been a fascinating experience for me to now be at the company and at the forefront of AI innovation. And the way that we are thinking about AI more broadly, but then also specific as it relates to DNS abuse, is that we are cognizant of the fact that AI has been around for a while, depending on how you define it, and that machine learning and predictive AI and analytical AI has been used for a number of techniques and ways to already mitigate DNS abuse. So as Greg alluded to with Copilot, generative AI is hopefully going to help us unlock further potential through a number of ways and actually make also the way that we can help mitigate DNS abuse more accessible to a broader set of defenders by breaking down barriers that may have existed before about skills level and using generative AI, in particular Copilot and other tools that we have to make it easier for the defender to use tools to mitigate abuse. One thing I will just upload up front, and then I'm going to hopefully make this as interactive as possible with the panelists and all of you in the room, is that the company is looking at AI in the context of security and in the context of DNS abuse through three lenses. The first one is, how do we maximize the use of AI for defense? And that is, how do we mobilize customers and community like yours and the ICANN community to adopt the technology quickly? And the reason I highlight speed is I can guarantee you those with nefarious purposes will be among the fastest to use the new tools to figure out how they can use it to advance their existing malicious activity. So the faster all of us can try to advance AI and use it for defense and mitigation techniques, the faster we can make sure that we can catch up, not just catch up, but also outrun the threat actors that are hitting organizations around the world every single day. The second piece I would highlight is that the company is early on very focused on figuring out what steps we need to take such that threat actors cannot take advantage of our AI products and services. So a year ago, the company released a policy that made clear if we detect that a threat actor the company is tracking, of which you can imagine there are many over the years that have in the past conducted an unauthorized access or otherwise came to our attention, and we notice that they're using AI products or services, we will take action to terminate their account. It doesn't matter if they're using AI in a productive sense. We don't want criminals to become more productive, so we will take action against that. And that is a policy that came from the leadership, not in response to regulation or government request, but was a reflection of the leadership's commitment to make sure that we empower the defender and try to make it as difficult as possible for the threat actors involved. And then the last piece, in terms of just overall framing, is that the company is focused on what is it that we need to do on our end to make sure that the technology isn't used as we think about Azure and our cloud services, and how can we also protect our AI products and services, which, as you can imagine, are being targeted by other threat actors who would like to know the inside of how we use them. So let me just use that kind of as a general framing of 3 dimensions. I know there's a lot to discuss when we go into the details of DNS abuse, but with that, forward to you.
Thank you very much, Tim. And I noticed, of course, you mentioned DNS defense or DNS abuse defense a number of times. So we're lucky to have with us Jeff Bedzer, whose life is entirely defined by the defense and cleaning up the DNS. I'm not going to call you the new sheriff in town because that's probably somebody else's trademark at this point. But in any case, Jeff, I think, oh, there you go. There you have a badge. We don't need no stinking badges. So in any case, Jeff, I'd like you to kind of dig a little deeper. And I know you have a slide deck, and probably is not written by a Microsoft Copilot. Might have actually been written by you. So without further ado, I'll let the slide deck and you speak for yourselves.
Thanks, Craig. And no, this one hasn't been, but I cannot deny that I have used AI successfully to do many decks. I'm going to capitalize on the fact that I spoke to this group, feels like a week ago already, yesterday, the day before, Sunday, about DNS abuse in a general sense. And I think that this presentation I've put together is about how CleanDNS is using AI processes to improve in that fight, just as Tim said. And I mentioned, I think, in our presentation, my presentation the other day was that if you're thinking about it now, they already thought about it, did it, and probably moved on to something faster because they're that far ahead of us. And if we're not going to be using the emerging technologies at the same rate and pace for defense, we're going to get so far behind so fast, it's going to leave everyone's head spinning. So what I'm going to be talking about is how we've been actively deploying API models into what we do. Because again, it comes down to, like I said the other day, there is a significant volume of abuse that we don't know about because it's not being reported. What we're seeing in all these active reports that are being done are about 5 to 7 sources that most people run the reports on. But that's the tip of the iceberg. And it's literally, if you don't see it, it's not reported. And the majority of people don't report the fish or the smish or whatever else they're getting. So if we don't know about it, we can't act upon it. So the best solution is detect it quickly. And when you detect it quickly, you can mitigate it quickly. And that's the space that CleanDNS sits in. We sit between the companies that detect the abuses and then the industry, or our industry, between the registries, registrars, and hosting companies who need to mitigate it. And our goal is constantly to speed up not just the reporting, but the detection, so we can get to the point where the process between detection and mitigation is seconds. Whereas I don't know if anybody has read that tome that I was the work party chair from SSAC, SAC 115, on interoperability and DNS abuse handling or management. But we found in that study several years ago that the average time was 96 hours between report and mitigation. And I think we can all just guess how many people click on a phishing link in 96 hours and how many victims that accounts for. And how many fewer if we can get it down in a couple of seconds versus 96 hours. So let me get into the presentation. SAC 115 was the template from which I decided to build CleanDNS, because many people in the industry pointed out to me that while it was a really good academic paper, unless somebody built the solutions that were talked about in the paper, it wasn't going to exist. And CleanDNS was built to match that. And I like to call it a virtue cycle, and I'll give credit where credit's due. Byron Holland from CIRA used that term with me when we were talking about it. We're trying to make not just solve a problem, we're trying to make the reporters better, and we're trying to make the industry better by solving the problem in the middle of, you found it, now what kind of evidence is required to act upon it, and then shorten the cycle of killing it. So it's an aggregation model to basically escalate that process. So Okay, let me get into what we're doing with AI and that. So the first one's easy. And it's one of those places where you can quickly see that the AI is better than the human. So everyone's been phished in this room. Anyone that hasn't, please explain why you're at a technology conference and you don't have a phone. No? Okay. Phishing is based on lures. And the lure is some company to make you believe that you're going to something that is not, whether it's a bank with an e-commerce platform, whether it's your telecom, whether it's your local doctor. There's a lure involved. And that lure is almost always an image that makes you believe it's that bank, it's that e-commerce platform, etc. Well, for humans doing analysis of phishing, they don't know every bank on the planet. They don't know every company on the planet. They don't have that knowledge. They've been doing it for 30 years. They're never going to know it all. The AI systems can pull from databases and systems that have those image files for quick comparisons. So image analysis can give you the ability to validate the logo. The image analysis can look and see, is there an attempt to grab credentials? Is there an attempt to grab personally identifiable information? What else is within this? And when I say image analysis, it's basically a screen capture. So the landing page of a fish or a farm or a fake shop or a smish. I'll stop going through all the acronyms. But you're basically able to do that screen capture and then you can analyze it for the content. And then the AI is very good at saying, yeah, this is structured in a way that is likely a fish. Sentiment analysis is based on looking at the text and looking at other components of it to say, man, that text is small on the screen. I apologize. we could share the presentation afterward if everybody wants it. Maybe I could read it on my screen for you. Hold on.
Yes. Analysis of inbound email reports related to content and intent of
Thank you.
reporter.
So the industry for the last 20 years has basically been an email-based reporting mechanism. And of course, the problem with that is it's unstructured data. So sentiment analysis allows you to take that unstructured email data and try and figure out what's happening. Humans are by default storytellers. And when you had something happen to you, you want to tell the story about how I got catfished and why I thought this person thought I was so attractive that they wanted me to send $50 so they could come visit me. And the stories are fascinating to read, but take a lot of time. And what you're really looking for in that text is what is the URL or domain involved and what are you accusing it of? You were phished and that's the URL. That's all I care about. The rest of the story is irrelevant to a mitigation effort. So the sentiment analysis helps us get there. And then a contextual relationship, again, putting on my readers, apologize, is the vector embedding the similarities between the blocks of text. So we're looking for patterns where, for example, spam or phishing, is this the same campaign from the same cyber criminal because they're using the same structure, format, et cetera, so we can develop understanding of larger groups. We're not taking down one at a time. Can we use the contextual relationships to figure out, oh, there's 10,000 of these. Let's take them all at once because they're all related to the same cyber crime based on the timestamp, the contextual relationships between the data. So I got ahead of myself, but logo entity detection is part of the image analysis. PII detection is, again, one of the other keys is that a lot of domains that are going to be used for abuse or have been used for abuse, they put it to a parked page and they put it to a parked page before they use it for abuse. And sometimes they'll use it for abuse, switch it back to a parked page. So when the good guys are looking at it, they're like, oh, it's just a parked page. There's nothing there. And then they wait for that traffic to go away and they turn it back on again. And now it's on a phishing page again. So detection of whether it's a parked page versus a phish is an important component of using the image analysis because you don't need a human to do that, again, which is shortening the span and speeding up the timing. So some potential future pursuits we're looking into is just the fine tuning of this whole process. So it's great for phishing, but what other harms can we do here? Because again, DNS abuse as defined under the contracted parties and their obligations are the ones that Greg spoke to. But everyone in this room knows there's plenty of other online harms, and there's plenty of other online harms that need to be mitigated. And most of the parties that represent those in the contracted parties house and the CCNSO act upon many other types of harms that are not required to act upon, but they do it because it's the right thing. So how do you fine tune an evidencing package that says this type of harm when presented this way is a harm so that it can be mitigated? Malicious code detection, right? That's difficult because if you have to process the code to determine if it's malicious, you're putting your systems at risk to being compromised. So using the AI to take and look at the patterns to say which malware family is this, what part is, how is this targeted, is another place where the AI can be used to fight that. And then lastly, the generative AI component of this, we've been using it to say, structure the outbound communications to the parties affected. If it's a registry reporting to a registrar, we use it to generate the text to explain what we've seen, what happened. But we use it to create templates, not to create the actual communications, because anybody that has played with AI, as Greg pointed out, and I admit a story to him, you got to be very careful, because if unrestricted generative AI starts to fantasize, and I actually had it write a paper for me on all the entities working on DNS abuse, and it came up with some great entities that I researched, and I researched the footnotes, and none of those entities existed. The websites they reference from didn't exist. So you've got to be very careful in generative AI to control the environment from which restrictions you give it. So pitfalls, transparency. There's nobody that works with me that doesn't understand that we're using these technologies, and we don't want to pretend we're not. You have to watch for data biases, and that is also a legitimate concern when it comes to which data sets you apply. If I start bringing in data sets from reporters that have a lot of false positives in them, but don't know they're false positives, I can corrupt my whole data set on validation. For example, if there's a whole bunch of image files that actually aren't e-commerce or banks, and they get into that data set, and now they're being confirmed as such, that bias can be problematic. False positives and negatives still require, at what point do you kick it out for human review? And apparently that's Tim. So I need your email address for that. But of course, sensitive case management about the data and the controls of those data, particularly for privacy purposes, et cetera. So I think that's the last slide. So I will turn it back over to you, Greg.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Very interesting and timely. Next, we'll turn to Ana Neves. Ana, you can say whatever you want.
Okay, thank you very much. So whatever I want, well, it's very good to be here in Seattle, and in particular here at large. It's always a great honor to be here at large, and because I was, since the beginning of my life in the GAC, I always defended that GAC and at large should really work together, because we should enhance our efforts in the public sector and in the end user sites. So what can I say after Microsoft and Jeffrey said and explained the DNS abuse? What I can say about Microsoft is that it's very good to know that you have a policy to mitigate the DNS abuse. But what about other companies that don't have that policy? And that policy comes from who? And that policy is envisaged by whom? And can we rely on the companies to have such policy? Can we rely? Why? So from the public sector perspective, that's what I think that I was invited to be part of this roundtable, is to strengthen the collaboration between public and private sectors, and to have more partnerships, and to see with the regulatory bodies what can be done, and to have that always in mind, that cybersecurity, to have that in mind, and governments, when they are regulating or thinking about public policy, to have always DNS abuse in mind. And so here multi-stakeholder efforts are really important to ensure responsible AI usage in DNS security. Another important point that I would like to highlight here is the development of AI governance frameworks. So I think it's very good to discuss this here at ICANN and together with at large, which could explore policies that ensure AI-driven security aligns with global internet governance principles. And this is a very good year to do that, as we are reflecting on the WSIS Plus 20 review, how to streamline this process with the Global Digital Compact, and what should we really envisage in all these processes and negotiations. And the last thing that I would like to highlight in this, my first comment, is to empower end users. So AI-driven protection should be designed with transparency and allowing individuals to make informed choices about security and privacy settings. So it's always about to have good sense, but to have end users well informed. So capacity building is always important. Privacy is always important to underline in all our efforts. So I would say that strengthening collaboration, having more public-private partnerships, developing AI governance frameworks, and empowering end users is my first 3 items for this discussion and for this roundtable. Thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you, Anna. Can we go back in the slide deck to where I stopped before, which is basically the first real slide here? Let's go to the next slide, please, just to cover some of the things that our good friends at Copilot have found, just to put a few more facts on the ground. So we're seeing AI-powered phishing attacks, which are using AI to personalize phishing, almost making it a bit more spearfish-like, mimicking trusted contacts, bypassing security filters, improving the syntax and grammar, unless that's being used to, unless the mistakes are there to make sure that people who are smart don't read them. Then initially, as well, AI can be used to pre-judge credentials, test thousands of stolen credentials in seconds, enabling brute force attacks, and basically, the repetitive nature of these attacks. This is a volume business, and so AI can enhance the power of volume in bad actors' threats. Next, malware can also be enhanced by AI with code that adapts dynamically to evade detection, and helping it to hide from antivirus software, which of course is looking for patterns it knows and learns. So also, of course, using AI. So again, kind of the battle of the bots. We also can see reconnaissance using network scanning tools, using AI at speed and at scale, identifying weak points in security infrastructure, kind of automated penetration attacks as well. And then, social engineering, again, can be made more dynamic, more real, yet fake, to bypass traditional filters, again, using AI to tweak things so they appear less like obvious threats. So this, clearly indicates why we have to be using sophisticated and constantly improving defense features to keep up with all of this. So some of those solutions, of course, are AI-powered DNS security tools, using zero trust architecture with stricter verification. I think all of us have noticed more use of multi-factor authentication, more use of different types of authentication and layers, even just in the last 6 months to a year, just to try to keep up with the threat levels. So, threat intelligence platforms need to keep enhancing. And, Tim has already, or rather Jeff has already alluded to that. Of course, there's always the human factor. You still need to train real people, employees and end users, the general public, on how to recognize phishing and social engineering attacks. Awareness needs to be kept up constantly. I just did my firm's annual cybersecurity training, and it's probably already out of date. As a lawyer, I can appreciate the need to continue to enhance legal frameworks. The law never moves as quickly as AI, of course, but trying to keep both legal and ethical rules in ways that govern AI more responsibly. And one of the things I'm curious about is whether the companies that are working on AI are aware enough of the DNS abuse universe as opposed to all of the other universes that are using AI. Our space, while it's important, is not necessarily top of mind. So whether AI companies are doing enough to work with the rest of the ecosystem. Last but not least, of course, continuing more proactive security measures, heightened paranoia is also critical. Next slide, please. This is Jeff's bio, at least the one that was given to me by Microsoft Copilot. You can read it at your leisure. It seems pretty accurate. Didn't make too much stuff up. I first asked for Tim's.
There was one area you pointed out.
Oh no, what was that?
Go back.
Go back slide.
Look at the year on the bottom of the second paragraph.
I don't go back. The year 2071. Well, actually, that's because there was a footnote there for one which I didn't remove. That's a human mistake. This was the first attempt using AI to get Tim's bio. It did not mention Microsoft at all. Again, hopefully more or less accurate, but again, not up to date. I put Microsoft into the prompt. I added Microsoft to the prompt, and voila, we find out he's the Senior Director of Global Cybersecurity Policy at Microsoft. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't put in the prompt. So Microsoft Copilot doesn't know Tim well enough yet, but I can see him taking notes, so that'll probably be fixed. I wanted to know more about Tim and his hobbies. So hiking, cycling, photography, reading. He has diverse interests and commitments to personal growth and well-being. At least that's what Microsoft Copilot. This is Anna's biography. Again, doesn't really hold a candle to the bio that she gave us, but it doesn't seem to be, completely off topic. But next slide. My first attempt resulted in a completely different Anna Neves, Anna Luisa Neves. I didn't use her middle name in this, but this person also is very much in our world in a sense. She's the Director of Global Digital Health at Imperial College in London. And I hope the two of you have met at some point. And if not, maybe you should look each other up. You probably have a lot of interesting things to discuss about our digital future. Next slide, please. This is me, if you want to know anything about me. This is a little old. It said I've attended over 10 ICANN meetings. The real answer is over 35 ICANN meetings. And I'm no longer the president of ISAC New York. I have demoted myself to secretary, still on the board. Everything else is more or less true. Next slide, please. That's it. This is another picture of Seattle in the fog as chosen by Microsoft Copilot. So let's get back away from the slides, although you can leave this one up. It's kind of pretty, although somewhat apocalyptic looking. Let's get into the discussion of the offense and defense of AI. And I'm wondering, start with you, Jeff. What are you anticipating in the next stages? And when you look at how AI is changing, what is that going to do to the DNS abuse area that we're in?
That's a great question, Greg. Man, I hope no one's listening to this and coming up with ideas out of me. So I think the space we're going to see the most of it is in identity management and at false identities. The ability for AI to create almost perfect national, local identity cards with the identities of real people on it, but maybe an alternate photo and such, so that it makes it almost impossible to validate a real person from a false person, is a big concern. And then when you think about the fact that you can now say, okay, AI, not his AI, because it's stopping this stuff, and I'm not being sarcastic, his does stop this stuff. AI, I want a credit card number that has not been used yet, that's been stolen from a breach. I want to match it to an ID for that same person with their actual home address on it. And if they're domiciled in the state of Pennsylvania in the US, I want a driver's license with that matches the Pennsylvania driver's license model. And I want to put my photo on it in a fashion that looks like a driver's license photo. So I guess no smiling. And then generate that image so that when I want to go buy a domain, buy some services with that stolen credit card, it passes all the checks for Know Your Customer. The credit card has not been flagged before. There's a perfect ID to match it. And that was all generated in, I don't know, what do you think, 4 or 5 seconds? That, when it comes to cybercrime has to be fueled by something. It's mostly fueled by stolen credit cards and compromised bank accounts. And you get to that money with basically modified stolen credentials. And the way to get those is basically those hard credentials that validate who a real person is. So I think that is one of the biggest ones that we're going to see emerging, that's going to really kind of change the landscape quickly.
Thank you, Jeff. Tim, I'll ask you kind of the same question, but I'll also ask you to kind of think about the earlier question I asked, which is what are the developers of AI doing in particular? Are they aware of the DNS abuse space versus all the other potential things that AI can be used for, good and bad?
Yeah, and the answer is yes, partly because it's in Microsoft's self-interest, given that we also run a significant cloud infrastructure and rely on making sure that overall the internet works in a way that it's not abused by threat actors. To just build on the example that we heard about the way that the attackers are using it, I think there's some good news in it, and in that since the advent of generative AI and the various models that have been put out, there were some that predicted a much more apocalyptic kind of scenario and what could unfold. We have not seen the resurgence of worms that we saw in the early 2000s that you could have imagined, like generative AI writing new code that would have prevented avoiding existing detection mechanisms or just the filters. What we've mostly seen is existing threat actors incrementally adopt AI for known TTPs and advance their objectives. So that's not great, obviously, but in terms of the spectrum of possibilities, I think there's some good news here in terms of what we've seen. And then I do think there is some interesting lessons learned already looking back at the past couple of months in terms of how defenders are using it. And as you demonstrated with your prompts, AI can be fun in terms of seeing what it produces, but it also highlights the importance of how you actually use the technology, what prompts you're using, how specific are the prompts, and to translate it now into defensive techniques. If you, for example, use a Copilot or Copilot for Security or any of the other AI products and services to produce specific reports when an anomaly is detected, and to just use it to automate more, for example, flagging that a specific anomaly has been detected, produce an executive summary. We also want to make sure that we make sure to instruct the model to err on the side of including more rather than less potential anomalies, so that we capture the false positives, because what humans should be doing then is reviewing what gets flagged, and we prefer capturing more false positives that we can then discard rather than the model potentially reducing the number of flags that may include more false negatives than anything else. So I do think, one, the human does remain important. The way that we can leverage AI is ideally used in a way that it helps us use the humans more effectively. And what, to your point about scale, makes me somewhat optimistic is, despite the concerns that you flagged about, in particular, that identity piece, which I completely agree with, is that one of the main challenges we've had on the defensive side has been a lack of skills and a lack of enough people trained to do certain tasks. which if we can get AI to use at scale to reduce those barriers of entries and use it to produce reports that are more easily consumable, even to folks who are less skilled in cybersecurity, then we may have an outside effect in terms of the overall net assessment of whether AI is helping advance defense or offense. Just one quick note to Anna's point that I didn't want to leave uncommented about the importance of engaging between the private sector and the public sector. I think looking back at the last 3 years, it's been fascinating to see how post-release of ChatGPT and the New York Times kind of front page, how quickly regulators speed with the EU AI Act, or in the US government, the case of the various policies that were in place. You had a very rapid implementation of new regulation and laws and policies, frankly, to the extent that companies had to make sure that they were catching up. And with the emergence of AI safety institutes, which again are supposed to help make sure that we have mitigations in place, that you can't just type in, oh, tell me this credit card number. Yeah. I've actually been quite impressed with how quickly governments and regulators have put frameworks in place within a very short amount of time, and how they've engaged with the private sector, be it Microsoft, be it many of the other companies, to try to put some frameworks in place that are risk-based and focus on what we should be paying attention to.
Thanks. Anna, I'd like to get your perspective, and particularly I'll ask for a European perspective, because the three of us, among other things that we are all in common, we're all very American. We're sitting in America all the time, which of course is changing massively as well. But we need to, I'd be interested to put some different perspectives into the mix here.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Europe, I think that we understand that the threat landscape for DNS abuse is rapidly evolving with AI and machine learning. So we are trying to develop guidelines for the ethical use of AI in DNS abuse prevention, while addressing privacy concerns related to AI-driven DNS traffic analysis. So we have this report from done by in the European Union. The European Union's comprehensive study on DNS abuse, which provides recommendations for registries and registrars. It is from, I think, December 2022. And it is interesting to see that domains like .de and .eu are the domains that are less less abusive. So where DNS abuse is not so strong. So this is evidence that some work and the technical implementation and this kind of work together between the public and private sectors is very important. It's very important as well to work together with researchers on AI, because those are the ones that can help us in preventing. And so to have this component of prevention ahead of what can be happen is very important. So again, multi-stakeholder, it's so important in all these digital processes, and DNS abuse is another one. So the importance to include academia, researchers, and developers of AI in all these processes are tremendously important. And so only with this kind of involvement and to listen all these people and entities and different stakeholders involved, we can achieve different layers of policies, being policies for companies, being public policies to address the DNS abuse. That's my take for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. We have a lot of people in the room, so I think it's and virtually as well. So I'd like to turn to Q&A. So if you are remote, please put your questions in the Q&A pod, and they'll be read aloud by Michelle de Smiter. And if you're in the room and you're on Zoom, please put your hand up. And I see Joanna's hand is up. And if you are not on Zoom, just raise your hand. And if you're not at the table, we have a roving mic, which will come to you. So don't be shy if you're not sitting near a microphone. The microphone will come to you. So we'll start with Joanna Kulesha.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Craig. This is Joanna Kulesha for transcription purposes. Thank you for all the presentations. It's wonderful to hear about the link between AI and DNS. I have a question that piggyback rides on Anna's intervention and that last comment. I think it might make sense for me to target this at Tim. Thank you very much for that very comprehensive review. You sort of addressed this. I'm not sure if you're comfortable answering this with your Microsoft hat on, so feel free to choose how to address it. We do have a research background, a shared research background. So if you want to speak about global cybersecurity policies, that's perfectly fine as well. I'm going to start with a little background to that question, but then I'd love your feedback. On one hand, Microsoft was vital in supporting Ukraine after the unprecedented Russian aggression. Microsoft intelligence, cybersecurity, threat analysis was vital for the Ukrainians to prepare their defenses. This situation might change shortly. It seems that the information sharing was stalled. Now it might be coming back. I think this is a very clear indication of how national regulation could target attempts to ensure cybersecurity, be it at the DNS abuse level or be it generally with regards to sharing information. On the other hand, Anna mentioned, and you indicated this as well, that there is enhanced regulation on AI, the AI Act included. Senator Cruz, in December of last year, said that the AI Act stalls innovation and could be considered foreign interference into AI development in the US. Now, this brings me to my last point and the question itself. Our good friend Marty Schake published a book, The Tech Coup, you might be aware of the concept there. And recently speaking about it, she mentioned that this could be the quantum moment for researchers who do not feel very comfortable researching in the US to move to the EU. The EU, she said, should roll out a red carpet, sort of in a reverse scenario that we witnessed in mid-1930s. So with your researcher's hat on, I'm not sure it's a comfortable question for Microsoft to answer, and I wouldn't pose it in this setting. What do you think is the role of regulation in developing AI for cybersecurity? And I will turn this into a policy-related question before Jonathan puts me in my place. What can the end-user community do, maybe working together with the Governmental Advisory Committee, to make sure that we use AI to protect the individuals from cyber criminals? I believe it's a diplomatic way to put a question, and I know you can clearly identify the geopolitical challenge I'm trying to address. Whatever thoughts you might be in liberty to share will be appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanna, and also good to see you again, which I think also goes back to pre-pandemic days and before my time in government. I'm happy to answer this in a Microsoft capacity because the company has been very clear with respect to some of the geopolitical challenges that we've encountered and is very committed to cybersecurity upfront for the company, for the customers. There's the Secure Future Initiative, which has put security back front and center for the company all up. Let me address the last point first about what this community can do. I think we are at a really pivotal moment of technological innovation where the progress we are making with artificial intelligence and Microsoft, has been rolling out new products and services on a fairly regular basis and plans to continue to do that, is for this community to help us figure out how best to use the technology for good and for, in this context, particularly the defense. And this really depends on, you can bet that the people who are focused on monetizing nefarious actions will be quick to test out how these new tools can help advance their objective. So we need to make sure we are as fast in adopting the technology. And if you identify areas where you see vulnerabilities, where you consider there to be research questions that a company like Microsoft should be focusing on, then please do share those with us because we are in the same boat together in trying to make sure we maximize the potential of the technology for good. So we definitely welcome, be it through the GAC or other mechanisms, input from this community and to hear from all of you. On the last point, on the first point about just the EU and regulation, the company has been very clear that we think that there are certain areas where regulation will be helpful. I think where the company and Microsoft starts getting more concerned is if the regulation is too prescriptive and not outcome focused, given the fast pace of the technology. And when we start seeing different regulatory frameworks pop up in many different countries and jurisdictions that are sometimes divergent or sometimes even at odds with each other, because then it quickly gets into the territory of becoming a challenge for us to navigate and implement. So we believe that right now we are at this cusp of really making significant breakthroughs where, to my earlier comment about the talent, we may be able to tip the scale at a systemic level in favor of the defense. So we want to make sure that we achieve that potential. I hope that answers.
Thanks so much, Tim, and thank you, Joanna, for the very comprehensive question. If we could turn to the Q&A pod next, and then after that, we'll go to Hadia.
Thanks, Greg. And this is Michelle for the record. We do have a question from Said Najib. With which method is finding AI in CleanDNS?
Well, the methods we use is in the presentation. I do know that internally we do use Copilot for internal uses, but on the platform, I think that's probably proprietary. We are using a commercially available, but I'm not at liberty to disclose which one.
Right. Our next question comes from Siva Subramanian. On the other hand, can't AI be used to design phishing sites to look more authentic to such an extent that the phishing site is free of the patterns and elements that are typical?
I'll take that question. Sure. So, yes, but a phishing site isn't just the landing page and the other details about the infrastructure surrounding that site. So, for example, most phishing sites have been created for the purpose of phishing. I mean, there are some compromised hosts, but the majority, it's a malicious registration to make that site. So the age of the domain is a key factor, as well as the structure, the underlying name servers, IPs, the reputation thereof. Many times you'll find that the underlying IP address and hosts are bulletproof hosts, and bulletproof hosts are those, the name bulletproof comes about because they won't respond to subpoenas or any type of process and don't log anything. That's really not a legitimate business practice. So if you're doing that, it pretty much means you're facilitating criminal activity. So there's a lot of factors to go with aside from just the landing page. But yes, the landing pages are getting better and better using AI. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you, Jeff. Next, I'll turn to Hadia El-Minyawi in the room. Hadia is coming to the microphone.
Thank you, Greg. And this is Hadia for the record. And my question is to Anne. So Anne, you spoke about transparency in AI. And my question to you is, what does transparency in practical term means? Does this mean AI open source? We know, for example, that AI open source still does not demystify how AI makes its decisions, and black box systems remain black boxes even with open source. So in practical terms, what does this really mean? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Very interesting. I think that when I mentioned the transparency of AI, it was about the transparency and accountability. So AI models should be explainable. So allowing DNS operators and cybersecurity professionals to understand decision-making processes. So if you don't understand what you are fighting for, so it's very difficult. So if AI models can be explainable, it's much easier to address what might be wrong. So that's it in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, did you have a question?
I do. Yeah, Jonathan Zook for the record. I only have my own AI, which I guess I'll call antique intelligence, to bring to bear on detecting phishing attempts and things like that. But it seems like most phishing emails are tied in some way to trademarked entities or to, large recognizable names. And somewhere embedded in that email is a link to a farming site. And I guess I'm curious is the degree to which an email handler could look and detect that who this was meant to be from, and look at the links that are embedded in the email and look them up to see if they're owned by the entity that the email seems to be from. It seems like a fairly straightforward task for an AI, but I haven't seen anything like that, I guess, to date. I mean, I remember being really surprised one day when I hit send in Gmail and it said, "Hey, it looks like you meant to attach a file," and I was really excited and then a little creeped out. But okay, they're reading the message. I mean, on the way in, it seems like that kind of an analysis says, "Hey, this appears to be from Norton Utilities, but the links embedded in it are Bitly, so be careful," or something like that.
I think this goes back to what we discussed at the beginning about when we talk about AI, a lot of this is not new, and that we actually have a fair amount of systems already in place that are based on machine learning and algorithm that, to your point, are the reasons why a lot of emails are going into the spam folder directly, because there are the filters that are now in place compared to 15, 20 years ago that make sure your inbox is cleaner than it used to be. This is where I think to your point, and also what you raised, the real potential we hope to see with AI moving forward is to better connect some of the dots that have been able to connect and bring different data sources and insights together, so that you can detect if a site has been registered in a way where we have concerns about the identity, be it because of the length of the page. And that's where we think the real potential may be, apart from making it more user-friendly and consumable. And to the point about explainability, figuring out what is it that the human actually really needs to know and read to then act upon it. So I hope that goes to you.
So we're over time, but I will take one last question. Amrita, please.
Thank you so much, Greg. Amrita, for the record, I have two questions. One is, I would like to understand from basically Tim, you and Jeffrey, is we've been speaking about English language abuse and how AI can use or not use or aggravate it. What about the non-English speaking? Because that's the global majority, what is happening there. Two is, we are seeing that this domain name abuse is growing. Content, obviously, but and its effect financially, reputation-wise, everywhere. And especially coming from global majority countries where you have new users who are not that literate in terms of digital or even literate to that extent. So what are you all doing for those end users with videos, trade tutorials, etc.? How are you doing, especially when Microsoft, about 10 years earlier, you had digital literacy courses, as in for people. So for this kind of safety, what are you doing? Because people are also losing money. Thank you.
I'll start and then happy to hand over. So Microsoft, with its business around the world, is rolling out products and services and models that are in multiple languages. That goes also as far talking about security with respect to our red teaming efforts that are not just taking place in English, but also in other languages. So we are very much committed to make sure that the technology is accessible to people around the world, and that also the safety mitigation measures and security measures are based so that they're reflected of the users that are using them. With respect to the capacity building and training piece of it, we made a big announcement last year with respect to Kenya and a specific focus on the global south, because we are very cognizant that we want to use the technology to bring new users also online and to make sure that they know how to use the technology We also have a lot of internal training where we are all encouraged to use itself. So it's not just focused on specific user groups or countries. I think it's an all-up effort to make sure that we provide the training alongside rolling out new products and services so that we can maximize the impact of the tech.
So thank you for that fine point, because I did neglect in my presentation to mention the fact that it was anything but English. But yes, the tools being used are done for any language that the threat comes in, whatever the image analysis is, whatever the text is. And that, again, is one of the reasons why the AI is so effective for us, because I don't have to have someone on staff that speaks and reads every global language. The AI can do the assessment of the language and determine what's going on and pull out the relevant components. So yeah, it is a very big component, is making sure we handle not just the majority of languages, but all languages, because since we're providing services around the globe, we see phishing, malware, et cetera, being delivered in every language. So we use the AI effectively to help us with the fact that I couldn't afford a staff that big that managed all those languages.
Thank you, Jeff. We've now come to the end of our time. Unfortunately, we still have some couple of interesting questions. So sorry, Dana and Atif, but this is, of course, a continuing discussion. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists, Jeff Betzer, Tim Maurer, Anna Neves, for being here. I'd like to thank you all for listening and making this NARALO roundtable to remember. We'll be back in this room at the bottom of the hour for the NARALO Town Hall. Thank you, and this meeting is now adjourned.
Record.